let's talk about the results of my overclocking. So here we are.
Enjoyed my visit to the natural corrals.
Hey all, and welcome back to Tech on a Budget. Today we're going to go over the results of my overclocking and my testing of my Zotac GTX 1080 Ti Amp or Amp Extreme Edition. Still not sure which it is. But anyway, it doesn't really matter. I do apologize, it's been forever making this video, but there's 5 people that has to use this computer and 4 of them are doing online schooling, so that doesn't leave much time for the 5th guy, me, to do anything. But anyway, so I did take the time to overclock my GPU and I did some benchmarks and some stress testing, and we're going to go over those results today. So a quick note before we get into the nitty-gritty. I am by no means an expert. I have done research, I have a little bit of experience, but I'm still going to share with you my results. So for the overclocking and testing, we used 3 basic tools on the computer. We used MSI Afterburner, Superposition Benchmark, and we used Ghost Recon Wildlands Benchmark. Seems to be pretty good. I mean, it was of limited use because it only goes for, half a minute, maybe 45 seconds, but it was still useful in seeing some of the performance increases. So for the overclocking, we'll get into the testing later in the video, but for the overclocking, we wanted to do benchmarks to get out-of-the-box performance results, because we have to have a baseline to compare it to. And then we do our overclocking and we figure out what our performance gains are. Like I said, I'm not going to go through the how to overclock a video card. For one, I don't have that much experience and I don't feel I should be telling you do this, do that, and do that, because each card's different, and the last thing I want to do is cause you problems. So these are my results that I got. So the actual overclocking results I got, it required a lot of tweaking, a lot of benchmarking, a lot of testing, but here is my overclock that I settled on this card. I ended up with a plus 100 on the voltage, 120% on the power limit, a plus 60 core clock, and a plus 275 memory. I could push it a little bit further, kinda, but I started hitting, I think, what is the power limit of the card. So as you can see, plus 60 isn't a whole lot on the core, so that gives you kind of an idea of how good this card is out of the box. So the results I got with the testing of the overclocks, I basically benchmarked it 3 times in a row, and I took the average of those 3 runs on both of the benchmarks, both the superposition and the Ghost Recon. So the results of the overclock on the superposition benchmark, I used 1080 high settings, and with no overclock, just the out-of-the-box performance, we ended up with an average FPS of 119 with a core clock of 1949. And then with the overclock on it, we ended up with an average FPS of 123 and a core clock of 2050. The benchmark testing for Ghost Recon Wildlands, we had it set to 1440p and very high graphics. With no overclock, with the straight out of the box performance, we had an average FPS of 85 with a core clock of 2000. With the overclock, our average FPS went up to 89 and our core clock bumped up to 2050. So as you might have noticed, my overclock testing with this card showed that there wasn't a whole lot of headroom between the out-of-the-box settings and my stable overclock that I was able to achieve. I've done a little research, and this seems to be fairly common, that for some reason Zotac does a pretty good job of giving you the performance with that little bit of buffer for safety. Now, I think there is some more performance to be gained if you really, really want to out of this card, but that involves actually physically modding the PCB of this card, and I am not comfortable with that. I don't have any experience with it, and if I mess it up, this card is way too expensive to replace. So I'm going to leave it here as it is with this overclock. So let's get down to the meat and potatoes of doing this testing and what I was really concerned with. I want to know how my card performs when it's under 100% load, both in out-of-the-box settings and with the overclock on it, and see what kind of heat we get. I wasn't able to do that before because I was worried about my VRMs. So to perform this test, I used the stress test on the superposition benchmark. So I can set it up for whatever, however long I want and whatever graphic settings I want. It's really quite a good tool. Also, I wanted to simulate having the old fans on it that were just running off the system header. So, and that was easy because in Afterburner, I can just set my fans at a static whatever. I've been monitoring my case fans, and they're generally, because they're running off the same system header that the old fans were, and they're running generally between 50% and 65% of their max RPM. So for the testing, I gave them the benefit of the doubt, and for the static tests, I set the fans at 70%. And for the other tests where I use the fan curve, I set up a fan curve in MSI Afterburner that was at 0% at 30 degrees, but then ramped up to 100% when the GPU core reached 50 degrees. So, and this is exactly why I went with the PWM fans, so I don't have to listen to the fans go 100% all the time to know I'm cool, but I can actually ramp that up according to the temperature of the GPU. So I did 4 runs of 10 minutes on the stress test. I did the no overclock with the fan set at a static 70%. I did an overclock with the fan set with the fan curve. And then I did overclock with the fan set at 70%. And I did an overclock with the fan curve on. And the results are kind of surprising. So the graphic settings for the testing were at 1440p with high graphic settings. And the interesting thing is with the first 2 tests, the no overclock with the fans set at static 70% and the fan curve, the temperature was exactly the same and the FPS was exactly the same. It was actually the same results with the overclocking tests too. Both overclocking tests got up to 56 degrees with an average FPS of 44. So I suspect that the limiting factor with these stress tests, with the temperatures being the same regardless of what I do with the fans, I think it has to do with the pump working at a specific RPM. I think if I was able to turn up the pump, we'd see some differences between having the fans at static 70% or having the fans on a custom curve. But regardless, I'm pretty happy with the results. I mean, I've got an overclocked video card on water running 100% through a stress test, and I'm not seeing over 56 degrees. So, overclocking this card is not really worth it. I would highly recommend this card just for out-of-the-box performance because it performs very well, and Zotac did an excellent job of leaving not a lot of performance headroom in there. Plus, the only real way to get more performance out of it that would make it worth wanting to overclock would be to do a physical mod, which most of us, let's be honest, we're not going to be willing to do that on a $1,000 video card. So if you're in the market for a Zotac 1080 Ti, I'd say go for it. If you're looking for a card to overclock, you should probably look elsewhere. Now, as to whether you should get the cooling bracket and go with the liquid cooling with the PWM fan so you can control them via the GPU, like I did, the answer to that recommendation is a maybe. So there's only one thing that really makes me want to say no, and the stock cooler will show you why. So this is where the GPU cooler sits, and you see there's thermal stuff here which actively cools your memory modules, and I don't remember what's right here. With the bracket and liquid cooling, these don't get any active cooling. What they get is they get the passive cooling by the air from the fan running over them. So that's why I would say no to the bracket and liquid cooling in this particular configuration if you're going to do an overclock on especially this card, but any card that has active cooling that you're not going to get with this setup. I don't think it's worth it to put those parts at risk. This GPU cooling setup is a good resolution for the issues I was having with this particular build. Whether I can recommend it to you, maybe, maybe not. It depends on why you're wanting to do it, what results you're expecting, and what's your budget. But I am ultimately much happier with this setup than the stock setup because, of course, as I said before, with the stock cooler on it and the air restriction from the power supply, I was seeing very high temps at very low utilization on my GPU. And now I can run it at 100% and never hit 60 degrees, which is good. The caveat to that is my memory module and some other parts of the card are not being actively cooled when they were before. So I'm not going to leave it overclocked because the performance difference is not worth it. I don't need to stress my extra parts that much. But with the PWM fans plugged into the GPU, I do have a better peace of mind that my VRMs are getting cooled better, and I do actually see lower temperatures at lower utilizations. Max utilization for stress test, the cooling loop reaches saturation at 53 degrees when it's not overclocked and 56 degrees when it is overclocked. So, you know, in an extreme case, it's not going to make a whole lot of difference for the core temp. I don't actually know, I don't have any actual measurements of how much difference it makes on the VRMs. That's more for my peace of mind. But in just everyday gaming and whatnot, I'm happy with it. I like it. So I hope you enjoyed this content. I had a ton of fun doing it for you. I enjoy tinkering. I've always wanted to see what this card will do. I'm not going to say I was disappointed, but I will say that I was surprised that I couldn't get much more out of it with overclocking than it comes right out of the box, which if you're not planning on overclocking, that's a good thing. But it was fun to tinker. I had a good time, and I hope you guys enjoyed this content. I hope you find it useful. I'm just sharing my experiences. But if you do, hit the like button. If you want to see more content, give me a subscribe. And if you have any questions or suggestions on any content you'd like to see, let me know in the comments. And until next time, we'll see you.